You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and Auto Camp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
While we may think of the late 40s and the 1950s as the heyday of American UFO sightings, some of the most interesting developments occurred in the 1960s. In that decade, we have the first claims of abduction made by Betty and Barney Hill, Lonnie Zamora's report of a close encounter in New Mexico, and the Kecksburg incident in Pennsylvania. Perhaps the most notorious incident took place in March of 1966, when numerous residents of certain Michigan towns reported seeing unusual lights in the sky.
I looked to the north of me, and looked like a fallen star, and I looked at it and I thought I was seeing things.
Frank Manor's UFO remained over his swamp more than 4 hours. His children saw it, his in-laws saw it, residents of the area saw it, the police saw it. 40 miles away, another swampland and another UFO sighting.
As the incidents all occurred over swampland, the lead scientific investigator of the Air Force's Project Blue Book suggested that the residents may have seen marsh gas, a real phenomenon I have mentioned before in talking about will-o'-the-wisp and jack-o'-lantern folklore, as well as some aspects of vampire legends in last year's Halloween episodes.
The Air Force sent its chief scientific consultant on UFOs, Professor J. Allen Hynek, to check the Michigan sightings. Dr. Hynek agreed that the good citizens of Michigan had seen something in the marshlands. He thought they had seen marsh gas.
It was and remains a valid, rational explanation of the event, but it did not go over well. The swamp gas explanation has since become the ultimate joke among ufologists to illustrate the lame cover stories that the government tries to pawn off on the public. That same year, representatives of the Air Force and Blue Book were compelled to defend themselves to the public, going on television and doing damage control to try to reassure America that they were not engaged in a cover-up.
The Air Force has been accused from time to time of hiding information about UFO. What do you have to say to that, Colonel Patton?
Well, these charges are absolutely untrue. Actually, the United States Air Force releases statistics on the UFO phenomena through the Department of Defense press desk periodically, and we've always honored accredited media when they want to investigate a given specific sighting.
There's nothing to hide?
There's nothing to hide at all.
Is there anything in the files, either classified or unclassified, that would indicate that there may be extraterrestrial visitors over here?
First of all, the project is completely unclassified. And there's nothing in the records that would indicate that we have been visited by any advanced civilization.
One young congressman from Michigan, Gerald Ford, who would go on to serve as president for a time, wasn't having it though, and he called for congressional hearings on this UFO matter.
The prominent congressman from Michigan thinks there should be a further investigation of the strange UFO reports. House Minority Leader Gerald Ford said this today.
The Congress should investigate the rash of reported sightings of unidentified flying objects in southern Michigan and other parts of the country. A congressional inquiry would be most worthwhile because the American people are becoming most interested and, in many instances, very alarmed by the UFO stories. I firmly believe the American people would feel much better if there was a full-blown investigation of these alleged incidents.
Thus, in April of 1966, the Committee on Armed Services did hold a hearing on the topic, the first of its kind, reviewing Blue Book and interviewing Hynek and others. During the hearing, the committee received an evaluation of Blue Book by a scientific advisory board, which determined that, quote, the present Air Force program dealing with UFO sightings has been well organized, although the resources assigned to it have been quite limited, end quote. Upon its recommendations, Blue Book was shuttered, its reports made public, and a more academic organization was contracted, tasking teams of scientists with continuing Blue Book's work. This was the Condon Committee, a University of Colorado project funded by the Air Force, which before long was accused of bias and setting out to debunk the phenomenon. In fact, there was a variety of views among the committee's membership regarding UFOs, and the idea that a scientific study might set out to disprove something does not mean it was biased or unscientific, since falsifiability is central to scientific testing, and much of the time that's how science proves things to be true, by trying and failing to prove them false. But a memo had leaked that showed committee members were reassuring University of Colorado administrators that they would debunk UFO sightings. Really, all this revealed was the inner workings of academic politics, since no university would want itself associated with a study that might tarnish its reputation. Nevertheless, the memo soured UFO organizations like NICAP on the committee. So when the Condon Committee reported in 1969 that, quote, nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge, end quote, their report was rejected by many as part of a supposed government cover-up, a notion that had developed in those years and continues to develop today. When for the first time in 57 years, we recently had another congressional hearing in which representatives interviewed whistleblowers who made some astonishing claims about UFOs, or UAP as they're styled now, and government efforts to hide what we know about them. This is Historical Blindness. I'm Nathaniel Lloyd, and as I watched these latest hearings, I couldn't help but think of the others in U.S. history who have come forward to reveal what the government is supposedly hiding about UFOs, and how it always seems to amount to nothing. Thanks for joining me for UFO Whistleblowers, an American Tradition, Part 1, Donald Keyhoe and John Lear. Before we begin the episode, I want to thank my new patrons, Sarah Longbottom and Bailey, and additional thanks for the one-time donation on PayPal by David Poto back in August. Thanks so much to all of my patrons. If you pledge on Patreon, you can get ad-free episodes and exclusive short episodes. I pledge to release one minisode a month, but I've been dropping 2 for a long time, always releasing something exclusive between each episode and effectively making this a weekly podcast for patrons. For example, after my episode on Nazi gold trains, I released a minisode about one particular looted treasure lost during World War II, the Amber Room. And after my episode on technofear and Luddism, I released some further thoughts on the topic, which I think really focused my entire position on the subject, much of it about the later 19th century English revolt, the agrarian swing riots. If you hear the term minisode and think these are just insubstantial little pieces only a couple minutes long, they're not. They are actually fully produced and researched episodes that typically range from 10 to 15 minutes in length. Patron feeds also get episodes early, and as mentioned, their episodes are not interrupted by advertisements or Patreon pitches like this one. So visit patreon.com/historicalblindness and support the show. Or you can support the show by making a one-time donation at historicalblindness.com/donate, or at the PayPal link in the show notes, or on Venmo at Historical Blindness. Now, on with the episode. Welcome to Historical Blindness. If you've been listening for a long time or have burned through my back catalog, you might have noticed a few different views I've taken on this subject. In my first episode to talk about UFOs, which I produced in the wake of the 2017 revelations about the Pentagon's UAP program and the Defense Department's release of 3 declassified UFO videos recorded by naval aviators, I used Jacques Vallée's survey of historical descriptions of phenomena that seem like UAP to explore the history of such sightings before the age of aviation. I included some skeptical viewpoints, but overall, I'm not that proud of that episode. I'd like to revisit that topic sometime and talk more about Vallée's credibility issues and how he takes some of his reports out of historical context. After that, I spoke about the phantom airship sightings of the late 19th century, which I was convinced were little more than a mass hysteria fueled by hoax newspaper articles. Since that time, I dug more deeply into UFO folklore and presented the alternative conspiracy narrative that much of UFO mythology can be attributed to U.S. government disinformation or PSYOPs, a conspiracy claim that appears to be proven, at least in part, by the activity of Rick Doty and the campaign to feed false delusions to Paul Benowitz. So as I watched this latest UAP drama unfold, I asked myself, is this real, a hoax, or some disinformation? Some of the recent hearings were devoted to interviewing witnesses about the UAP encounters caught on video and made public in 2017. But interestingly, some compelling alternative interpretations of even these recordings from cockpit instrumentation displays have since been provided by skeptics like Mick West, who has been a vocal and convincing proponent of mundane explanations, suggesting that the objects seen on such videos may be distant planes, birds, balloons, or other airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, or simply optical illusions. But one whistleblower who spoke with Congress this summer, David Grusch, is making far more astonishing claims than having seen or recorded something unidentified. Grusch claims that the U.S. government has retrieved crashed, quote, non-human spacecraft, end quote, including, quote, non-human biologics, end quote, or alien bodies.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And that they have taken lives in the course of their cover-up of this information.
Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes, personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Besides the obvious reasons to be skeptical of such claims, I thought it important to highlight that nothing Grusch is saying is a new or unheard of claim. In fact, since the 1950s, there have been numerous other such quote-unquote whistleblowers who have made comparable claims. And looking back at all of them, I hope to give a clear sense of why we should all remain skeptical of Grusch's testimony as well. The first predecessor of Grusch that comes to mind is Donald Keyhoe, who might be safely credited as the first person to popularize the idea of a U.S. government cover-up of UFOs. Like Grusch, Keyhoe served in the armed forces, specifically in the U.S. Marine Corps. resigning from active service after receiving an injury in 1922. Afterward, he helped organize Charles Lindbergh's nationwide tour after crossing the Atlantic, and he wrote a book about it, which helped to launch his writing career. He regularly took freelance writing work from major publications like Reader's Digest and the Saturday Evening Post. And in 1949, when thanks to Kenneth Arnold's claims of quote-unquote flying saucers, UFOs were becoming a topic of public interest, he was tasked by True magazine with writing on the subject. His article, which suggested that the military and the Pentagon were hiding the truth about flying saucers being extraterrestrial, was a huge success and earned him a book deal. Within 5 or 6 years, he had written 3 books on the topic: The Flying Saucers Are Real, Flying Saucers from Outer Space, and The Flying Saucer Conspiracy. Although he may seem more like a conspiracist author than a military whistleblower, he was presented by the media in his numerous television appearances as a former military man with contacts in the upper echelons of the Pentagon. Indeed, the Air Force's own press secretary provided a blurb for his book, further legitimizing him. And as he relied on official reports and interviews, he seemed to be more of an official informant than a crackpot. But in reality, he was an entertainer. Before he found the UFO topic profitable, he wrote science fiction prolifically, publishing stories in Weird Tales. And indeed, his tales about UFOs became weirder and weirder as he felt the need to ratchet up his revelations about the UFO conspiracy in his successive books, bringing in claims about the Bermuda Triangle and latching on to an astronomer's mistaken claims, quickly disproven that a land bridge could be seen on the moon, to argue that this conspiracy involved secret lunar bases. In order to demonstrate Donald Keyhoe's clear lack of credibility, we need only examine his 1958 interview with Mike Wallace, which can be viewed in full on YouTube. In it, Keyhoe claims that the Air Technical Intelligence Center, or ATIC, had declared that UFOs were real.
The Air Force has said time and time again, this is a quote from Richard Horner, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Research and Development, all but a small percentage of these reports of unidentified flying objects have been definitely attributed to natural phenomena that are neither mysterious nor dire, end quote. Weather balloons, mirages, ordinary sky phenomena like meteors, airplanes themselves. What about that?
I'll answer that, but I'd like to make several points doing it. In 1947, the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Dayton, the top Air Force intelligence men and scientists under contract, sent a secret document to the Commanding General of the Air Force saying that whatever these things were, they were real.
Really, all the ATIC confirmed was that some sightings seemed to be actual aircraft, not spacecraft, and stressed that there was simply not enough data after the fact to determine the origin of whatever flights might have been seen. He also claimed that the ATIC confirmed in a secret report that UFOs were interplanetary spaceships.
In 1948, ATIC, the same group, sent a top-secret estimate to the Commanding General, Hoyt Vandenberg, said these were interplanetary spaceships.
This appears to have been a simple overstatement of a claim made first by Edward James Ruppelt, former head of Project Blue Book, in his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. Ruppelt himself might be viewed as the first UFO whistleblower if it were not for the conservative view of UFOs that he maintained throughout his book. Indeed, later, Ruppelt would explicitly call UFOs a, quote, space-age myth, end quote, and would make it clear that he never cared for Donald Keyhoe, who Ruppelt thought sensationalized the topic and made unsupported claims about what military officers actually thought on the subject. Despite this, in his book, likely written to supplement his income during his retirement, Ruppelt had included enough sensational tidbits to enthuse ufologists, including this mention of a secret report that has never been proven to have existed and may have been an invention for the book. In reality, though, if one reads the book closely, Ruppelt only actually implies that this supposed secret report came to such a conclusion, stating that General Vandenberg rejected the report because he, quote, wouldn't buy interplanetary vehicles, end quote, and further stating that, quote, the report lacked proof, end quote. So on close examination, this is certainly not the smoking gun Keyhoe pretended it to be. Even if it existed, it sounds more like a report that offered no evidence and may not have even come to so certain a conclusion, as Keyhoe suggests. As the interview goes on, Keyhoe offers a 1952 intelligence analysis of UFO maneuvers as if it were evidence of what he claims.
In 1952, there was an intelligence analysis of the maneuvers of these things, as seen by radar, triangulation, radar photographs.
But he fails to mention the findings made public in 1952, as Ruppelt reported that, quote, the possibility of the existence of interplanetary craft has never been denied by the Air Force, but UFO reports offer absolutely no authentic evidence that such interplanetary spacecraft do exist, end quote. This is common of Keyhoe's rhetoric. He almost invariably misrepresents or takes material out of context in order to present it as supportive of his thesis.
You have mentioned 4 documents that you claim exist. So we spoke with the Air Technical Intelligence Center at the Pentagon earlier this week, and this is what we were told officially by them. 3 of the 4 documents Major Keyhoe refers to simply do not exist. The 4th document does exist. You can have a copy of it, Mr. Wallace, and you can see that it doesn't say what Major Keyhoe claims it says.
To Mike Wallace's credit, he pushes back and challenges a few of Keyhoe's assertions, catching him when he gives some inconsistent and seemingly made-up statistics.
The Air Force says they have this down to 1.9%. Now, I have in my possession a copy of Special Report 14, which is their Bible on this. In the back, it has a table showing that 3,201 cases they examined, 19.5% were unsolved, and they admit they still are unsolved. You add up what they've had since then, it makes over 12% of the reports, and those are mostly from the best possible sources.
Well, now, wait just a second. I'll use your figures. The Department of Defense released an official bulletin on November 5th, 1957, saying that from June of 55 to June of 57, a 2-year period, just a fraction over 2% of all investigated unidentified flying objects had to be listed as unknown. 2%. So that's your 1.9.
What was the period again?
55 to 57. The rest were determined to have been balloons, airplanes, hoaxes, and a category about 12% called insufficient information, which means that the report was so flimsy that there was simply nothing to check on. I must confess that they have opened their files quite willingly to us in our preparation for this program tonight, and they've given us very convincing evidence, Major Keyhoe.
But much of what Keyhoe states goes unchallenged by Wallace, which is often the case in an interview, as Wallace couldn't have been expected to recognize and refute every misleading claim Keyhoe had prepared. After the fact, though, that is exactly what we can do. Besides reports that have never been proven to exist, he cited another that specifically stated there was no evidence of UFOs.
And after they got through, this group said, you don't have proof that these things exist, not scientific proof.
And he then questions why they would continue to investigate them if there were no evidence.
And they have been spending a lot of money investigating flying saucers. If they don't exist, why the money? Why did the intelligence teams rush out every time there's a sighting?
Then, almost within the same breath, he says they would be hiding information about UFOs in order to avoid a hysteria.
The reason that was given to me was that they were afraid of hysteria. Remember the Orson Welles show way years back when he scared people into the hills with the idea of invading Martians?
But of course, preventing a panic would also seem to be a valid reason to investigate and disprove such claims. And taking a tactic that later conspiracy theorists will also use, Keyhoe presents a quotation by General Douglas MacArthur that he seems to think proves the general is in on some hidden truth about aliens.
In 1935, General Douglas MacArthur said the next war would be an interplanetary war, and we'd have to unite against people from other planets.
In fact, Keyhoe is perpetuating a common misquotation of General Douglas MacArthur. This exact statement has been proven to have never been made by MacArthur, and especially not at West Point, as is the common claim. Rather, the mayor of Naples reported once, secondhand, that MacArthur had said something to that effect, but that he was talking about, quote, 1,000 years from now, end quote, when, quote, today's civilization would appear as obsolete as the Stone Age, end quote. MacArthur did talk about the idea of a, quote, ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy, end quote. But this was in a speech years after Keyhoe's interview, and in it, MacArthur is listing numerous astonishing places that the frontiers of science seem to be taking us, in energy and medicine. In short, he is musing on the future, calling all these thoughts, quote, such dreams and fantasies as to make life the most exciting of all times, end quote. This interview alone serves to demonstrate the kind of cherry-picking and misrepresentation that Donald Keyhoe and other UFO conspiracists since then have relied on in order to spread their claims. Like so many hoaxers and denialists and other purveyors of misinformation, Keyhoe makes disingenuous challenges designed to make him seem sincere, which in reality are just patently ridiculous.
I will ask the United States Air Force to have the Marine Corps put me on active duty for court-martial, if that is not the case.
Only Marines who have been retired less than 30 years, considered reservists, can be restored to active duty, and Keyhoe had been retired 35 years. And both reservists and retirees were long believed to be not subject to court-martial. That did not change until 2020, when a retiree was court-martialed in a landmark Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals decision. But that was for the crimes of attempted sexual assault and child sexual abuse. At the time Keyhoe issued this disingenuous challenge to court-martial him, he was a retiree, a civilian not subject to such a proceeding by any precedent, and by misleading the public about a government cover-up, he had committed no criminal offense warranting a court-martial. In fact, as a professional writer, pretty much any outlandish claim he made was protected by the First Amendment, as long as he was not inciting lawless action. The challenge was little more than a stunt, and that really sums up Donald Keyhoe's career as a writer and media personality. Once he saw that writing about UFOs brought him money and attention, he dedicated himself to it, and he became a minor celebrity for it. Once he even appeared on a game show called To Tell the Truth, in which celebrity panelists had to pick out the real Donald Keyhoe among a group of actors pretending to be him.
The votes are in and the minds are made up. Let's find out now. Which one of these three gentlemen, in truth, is Major Donald Keyhoe?
Some may see Keyhoe's biggest contribution to ufology as his founding of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, an influential civilian UFO research group, the power of which he used to lobby for the congressional hearings of 1966, which I described earlier. Really, though, I would argue that his lasting contribution was the marriage of ufology to conspiracy culture, inventing the idea of a massive government cover-up.
It's a fairly serious charge that
I know
you
it
make.
is.
You make the charge that the United States government is withholding from the people of the United States certain very important information.
But like most prominent conspiracy theorists, his heyday would come and go, and he would disappear into obscurity. His ouster from NICAP came as the result of the organization's bankruptcy, and by the 1980s, his involvement in ufology did not extend beyond an occasional appearance at a UFO conference. It's worth noting that he died at 91 after struggling with declining health for years. He was never silenced by the quote-unquote silence group he claimed was hushing up everything that he published books about and spoke about on national television.
Now for a brief intermission.
As listeners of Historical Blindness, you're no strangers to the fact that history is a lens through which we can better understand the present. Or as Shakespeare put it, what's past is prologue. History is the indispensable context without which we cannot hope to truly understand current events. You understand that, and so do the creators of the American Scandal podcast. Every season, they immerse listeners in the biggest controversies in U.S. history, helping us understand America's dark side and learn from its troubled past. Its latest season, Ruby Ridge Standoff, delves into an incident that sowed the seeds for the rise of the modern radical right. It transports you to 1992, where in a remote corner of Idaho, federal law enforcement surround a small cabin. They've come for Randy Weaver, a survivalist who took his family to the mountains in anticipation of the apocalypse. A simple weapons charge brought the agents here, but the situation is about to explode into a deadly and tragic standoff that will later become a rallying cry for far-right extremists, fueling distrust and violent anti-government sentiment for decades. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of American Scandal's Ruby Ridge Standoff early and ad-free right now on Wondery Plus. Every summer, I'm careful to avoid getting burned. My summer plans always include applying sunscreen so I can attend barbecues and protests without worrying about getting scorched. And when I make my plans by making phone calls, I also don't want to get burned by an outrageous wireless bill. That's why I switched to a Mint Mobile plan and saved enough to take a summer vacation. With Mint, I found no difference in speed or coverage, just a big difference in cost. And right now you can switch to a Mint wireless plan like me to avoid sweating those surprise charges and overages. You'll just be chillin' with Mint's offer of 3 months premium service on the nation's largest 5G network for just $15 a month. With high-speed data and unlimited talk and text, it might just be the coolest thing happening this summer. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get this new customer offer and your 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month at mintmobile.com/blindness. That's mintmobile.com/blindness. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Now, back to the show. By the time of Donald Keyhoe's death, another godfather of UFO conspiracy theories had arrived on the scene. Born of a rather famous and influential family, John Olson Lear was born in 1942 to Bill and Moya Lear. His father was a self-taught inventor and industrialist who, as a radio engineer, would pioneer the trend in miniaturization. and develop 8-track music cartridges. He was best known, however, for his mass production of business jets, the Lear jet. Bill's son, John, attended a boarding school in Switzerland, where he claimed to have been the youngest American to have ever climbed the Matterhorn. There is no evidence of the truth of this claim that I can find, but it is actually among the least far-fetched claims that John Lear would go on to make. While his father made a name for himself building planes, John would make his reputation flying them. And in 1966, the very same spring that UFO sightings were blamed on marsh gas in Michigan, and Congress reviewed Project Blue Book, he piloted one of his father's jets around the world in record time. Perhaps even more than the retired Marine Donald Keyhoe, John Lear might have had a better claim to whistleblower status when he came out with revelations about a government cover-up, because he claimed to have actually worked for U.S. intelligence services during Vietnam. In fact, what he did, it seems, was pilot cargo planes for Air America, which was covertly owned and operated by the CIA, making him a de facto CIA operative between 1967 and 1983. However, what Air America pilots did was deliver supplies like livestock and rice, and perhaps the occasional narcotic for allies who happened to be drug lords, and transport doctors and refugees, as well as the occasional commando, saboteur, or spy. But as a simple pilot, he would not have been someone privy to the kinds of secrets he would later claim to have discovered. Like Keyhoe before him, and like David Grusch today, he pieced together his grand conspiracy claim from things other people told him, and from things he read, usually unreliable claims spread by other conspiracy theorists. In 1987, he circulated a press release that outlined his conspiracy claims in broad strokes. And soon after, an ambitious local newsman in Las Vegas, Nevada, George Knapp, put him on the air in the studios of Channel 8 KLAS TV, a CBS affiliate.
Hello and welcome to On the Record. Flying saucers, extraterrestrials, monsters from outer space. The government has been telling us for years that they're not real. They're weather balloons, or swamp gas, or reflections from the sun, or the ravings of lunatics. But serious UFO researchers say a breakthrough may be very close. One of the most dedicated UFO researchers lives right here in Las Vegas. His name is John Lear, and he is my guest today. Mr. Lear, thanks for being here.
Okay, George.
He claimed that his interest in UFOs started because of the sightings of members of his family. But here it seems he may have been continuing his long practice of exploiting the name and reputation of his father, as there is no evidence beyond John's assertion that Bill Lear ever claimed to have seen a UFO. Regardless, the mere fact that sometimes pilots and others see things in the sky that they can't readily identify is nothing compared to the conspiracy claims that John would promote, that the U.S. government had retrieved crashed alien spacecraft and recovered extraterrestrial astronauts.
And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly. They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies in cryogenic storage. We even have the name of the person whose job it is to show these bodies to the heads of state and the people who are authorized to see them. They represent at least 5 different civilizations.
This should sound very familiar, as it's quite like what David Grusch asserted before Congress earlier this summer. Except here, Lear claims far more craft retrievals, far more biological remains, and he would even claim living aliens were in custody, adding the further layer that there are numerous alien races that have visited us, and as he would go on to claim, that the U.S. government has colluded with aliens for decades. Like Keyhoe before him in Lear's interview with Knapp, he makes numerous assertions that the newsman lets pass unchallenged. and that proved to be illogical or entirely misleading on further examination. So, for example, he explains that there is plenty of evidence for what he claims, but that the press is just not interested in the story.
Why hasn't it come out if so many people, and you've told me about this before, have seen it or seen these aliens? Why haven't some of them come forward?
A lot of them have come forward, but they're just not getting any press. It's something that people just don't want to deal with, the press doesn't want to deal with, and people aren't going to listen to something unless Dan Rather or any of your big press people are going to tell them about it. And they're just too spooked. The Air Force has made an art form of ridiculing people who have talked about this thing. They've done an excellent job of covering it up for the last 40 years.
I can't imagine a Dan Rather or a Tom Brokaw, if that were to come to their attention, a story of that magnitude, that they wouldn't do something with it.
Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know why they don't do it. There certainly is enough evidence based on what I've looked at.
The simple fact that UFO stories had been huge in the 1950s and big again in the 1960s, as evidenced by Donald Keyhoe's continued TV appearances and the congressional hearing of '66, and the simple fact that Lear was spouting his claims to a television audience in that very moment, would seem to disprove this and suggest that when the press rejects such news stories, it may be because they have no merit. Using Keyhoe's established playbook, Lear also took documents and statements entirely out of context in order to make it seem like he had uncovered proof of some grand government conspiracy to cover up their alien dealings. So, for example, when asked directly by Knapp for evidence, he shares a quote from a physics textbook used by the Air Force.
Okay, you mentioned the saucers and the bodies. Now, what kind of proof do you have that is true? How do you know that?
Well, let me take a look. Let me read to you first what the Air Force says about the bodies. First of all, I'm going to read from the Introductory Space Science, Volume 2, Department of Physics, United States Air Force. This is Chapter 13, Unidentified Flying Objects. Now, this is what the Air Force has the students at the Air Force Academy read. And it says, the most commonly described alien is about 3.5 feet tall, has a round head, arms reaching to or below his knees, and is wearing a silvery spacesuit or coveralls. Other aliens appear to be essentially the same as Earthmen, while still others have particularly wide wrap-around eyes and mouths with very thin lips. And there is a rare group reported to be about 4 feet tall, weight of around 35 pounds, and covered with thick hair for clothing. Members of this last group are described as being extremely strong. Now, I'm not making this up. This is an Air Force. You can pick out an Air Force physics book and read this stuff.
Now, there are a few things to point out with this quote. First, it's saying aliens are, quote-unquote, commonly described this way, not that they are real and really appear this way. Also, he is completely misquoting the textbook.
And at the end of the chapter, they go on to say, this leads us to believe in the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors to our planet, or at least of alien-controlled UFOs.
Its text is available online, and where Lear quotes it as saying, quote, this leads us to believe in the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors, end quote, it actually says, quote, this leaves us with the unpleasant possibility of alien visitors, end quote. A small but crucial misquote that makes it appear the textbook makes an argument that it does not. In fact, the final conclusion in this chapter is that, quote, the best thing to do is to keep an open and skeptical mind and not take an extreme position on any side of the question, end quote. Moreover, Lear claims that every president knows about this well-kept secret, and then he quotes from Ronald Reagan, who a couple times mused about how humanity might come together in the face of a global threat.
Each president has been informed up to and including President Reagan. Let's talk about what the president has actually said. Has he mentioned anything about aliens?
President Reagan?
President Reagan on December 4th, 1985. This is a copy of the speech from the White House, just before he went over to Iceland. He says, I couldn't but one point in our discussions privately with Secretary General Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children, wherever we may live in this world, I couldn't help but say to him, Just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet outside in the universe. We'd forget all our local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together.
He couldn't be just making a supposition for purpose of making a point? You're saying he's trying to tell us something?
Well, here, 1 week ago at the 42nd General Assembly in front of the UN, September 21st, he says, "In our obsession with the antagonism of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside, universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force not already among us?" Now, this is right out of a White House speech. I'm not making this up.
In reality, such a thought was not original, having appeared in science fiction like Star Trek for decades. And even further, going back 50 years before the first modern UFO sighting. It seems like Reagan was just paraphrasing a sentiment expressed by psychologist John Dewey, who in a 1917 speech said, quote, "The best way to unite all the nations on this globe would be an attack from some other planet. In the face of such an alien enemy, people would respond with a sense of their unity of interest and purpose," end quote. And if we think logically about what Lear is claiming here, he is saying that presidents like Reagan keep this secret, but then suggesting that Reagan was regularly hinting about the secret. Likewise, he quotes President Jimmy Carter, who claimed to have seen a UFO and who swore to disclose government info on UFOs to the public.
President Carter, we have the quote from Carter when he was during his election campaign, "If I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I am convinced that UFOs exist because I have seen one."
Jimmy Carter says he saw one.
That's Jimmy Carter. He saw one in 1973.
But he didn't tell us, did he?
He doesn't. The pressure is enormous on these people to cover this stuff up.
To Lear, this is evidence of the pressure to keep even presidents quiet. But conversely, it also seems to be evidence that these presidents would have disclosed such information if there were any such information to disclose. Almost all of what Lear claimed to have uncovered in his research was actually cribbed from the UFO conspiracy claims of other quote-unquote researchers, claims that have mostly been convincingly refuted. For example, he repeats a lot of claims about cattle mutilations, expressing a clear admiration for Linda Moulton Howe's television documentary on the topic, A Strange Harvest.
Now, these cattle mutilations, there's been a film made about that, and perhaps in a couple of minutes we can take a look at some excerpts of that.
Yeah, Strange Harvest was a good one.
I spoke about these claims regarding cattle mutilation previously in my UFO Disinfo series. Coming as they did in the midst of the satanic panic, one early theory for some of these livestock deaths was cult activity, but before long it was attributed to extraterrestrials. One far more supportable and rational, though still conspiracist view, which I presented in my examination, is that the livestock had been experimented on and studied not by aliens, but by covert government agencies who were concerned about the emergence of mad cow disease. But most scientists have concluded that all observations point to the activity of predators, scavengers, and parasites, with these supposedly surgical incisions actually being explainable through the natural processes of dehydration, decomposition, and carrion feeding. In this way, this myth is much like vampire folklore, born of ignorance about the changes death brings. To get a sense of how misleading claims about cattle mutilation can be, and how little John Lear knew about the things he said, we can listen to his ridiculous statement about supposed incisions in dead livestock, showing that a laser had been used.
This is the mutilation. New Mexico State Police did the research on, or the investigation on it, and they cut out certain parts and the cut was made with a laser beam far sharper than anything we have. As a matter of fact, they were able to determine that they cut between the cells and didn't cut the cells themselves. We presently don't have this kind of technology.
The fact is that anytime we cut anything, we are cutting between the cells. A simple paper cut cuts between the cells, clumping them to either side. Even an extraordinarily sharp blade made of obsidian might at most damage some cells with blunt force, but not split them. What he's saying here is absolutely backward. If the tissue were really examined at the cellular level, as he's saying, then it would be more surprising, more indicative of laser microdissection if the cells had been cut. But even then, it would not be evidence of extraterrestrial technology. And beyond his poor grasp of science and promotion of dubious claims like these, he also promoted outright hoaxes. For example, John Lear was a big promoter of the Majestic 12 hoax.
The people that control this information is a organization that we know of as MJ12, and their top group of military and scientists.
To hear more about that, check out my episode, The Great Los Angeles Air Raid and the Secret Memos of Majestic 12, and also my UFO Disinfo series. Essentially, it was the purported leaking of documents claiming to show the formation of a shadowy government group responsible for the UFO cover-up, dating all the way back to the supposed UFO retrieval at Roswell, New Mexico in 1947.
Well, the whole thing started in July 2nd, 1947. That was the first crash.
First crash of an alien spaceship.
Of an alien spaceship. July 6th is when they recovered it and sent it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. July 7th is when they held the press conference and told the people it was a weather balloon, which the press bought hook, line, and sinker. September of that year, President Truman established MJ12, and the purpose of that was to study the saucers and cover up the existence of UFOs.
Never mind that it leaked to a pal of Bill Moore's, the writer responsible for turning the Roswell incident into the foundational UFO myth that it is today. And never mind that there is evidence the documents were forged and then smuggled by Bill Moore into the National Archives in an attempt to authenticate them. Moore himself had serious credibility issues, having also popularized the Philadelphia experiment hoax, which I also discussed and refuted in detail last year in my series Stranger Things Have Happened. It was later revealed that Bill Moore had been working on a fiction novel that featured a concept very close to the Majestic 12 claims, further indicating that it had been a hoax. In 1989, when Bill Moore revealed to a ufology community at a Las Vegas MUFON convention that he had spread government disinformation given to him by intelligence operative Rick Doty, it should have finally discredited him and his claims about the Philadelphia experiment, the Roswell incident, and MJ12 forever. Instead, it only seemed to sour UFO enthusiasts on Moore personally, and convince them only of the falsehood of the claims about a massive underground alien base in Dulce, New Mexico, made by Paul Benowitz, a UFO researcher driven to mental breakdown by Doty's and Moore's disinformation. John Lear was a purveyor of all of these claims, including the discredited claim about the Dulce base, which he claimed was a joint operation run by extraterrestrials and the CIA, where he said they kept vats full of human body parts, and in which he claimed a battle between aliens and humans had occurred after the agreement between the two sides had failed.
They're not so benevolent, so they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes. We discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception.
Who knows what his sources were for some of these claims, but after Bill Moore's disclosure that Dulce Base was a psyop, he didn't really promote it further. Still, though, even years later, as Lear's research and influence on the UFO community was further magnified by his regular appearance on the massively popular Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, the world heard him bending over backward in his insistence in continuing to believe Moore's other claims, even the discredited Majestic 12 papers.
From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening or good morning, and welcome to another edition, a Friday night, Saturday morning edition of Coast to Coast AM. Live talk radio throughout the night time. Now the largest, fastest growing all-night program in America. Period. It's good to be with you. I promised you John Lear this morning, and so it shall be. All right. Also in that same timeline, 1947, the establishment, the original establishment of MJ-12, and the MJ-12 documents, which I've seen, John. Do you view those as legitimate?
The information is legitimate, not necessarily the documents.
As can be discerned from his claims about Dulce Base, we see that John Lear seized on wild UFO conspiracy claims and then embellished them, making wilder and wilder assertions that seem to have sprung from his own imagination. For example, with the premise that Majestic 12 retrieved alien bodies, he speaks of autopsies.
John, a brain on the left and a brain on the right?
Yeah, it was called bifurcated brain system. They were completely independent and separated by a ridge bone. Now, why that was, I don't know, but I remember reading the autopsy report on it.
And using terminology that would later be found in other documents circulated among ufologists, likely forged to expand the MJ-12 mythos and corroborate claims like the ones Lear had long made, he speaks about living extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBEs, and the interviews conducted with them.
It stands for extraterrestrial biological entities. We captured 3 live EBEs. Now there's still one EBE still living, EBE-3, and there is a videotape that eventually is going to be released to the public, and it's an interview with him.
But you can hear in his interviews that he lacked any credible evidence, relying only on documents he says he has seen.
Wow, you have an autopsy?
Well, you know, the stuff that Stringfield put out.
Yeah, all right.
As hard as that may sound, as hard as that may be to believe, there is a videotape of an interview with EBE-3.
And what is this language that the interviewers are?
I haven't seen the tape, so I don't know.
Interestingly, he was among the first to suggest that Groom Lake, aka Area 51, was a place where these alien prisoners were held and their bodies and craft studied.
There was 2, one in Los Alamos and one either at Edwards or up at the test site.
At Groom Lake, Nevada.
At Groom Lake.
But like Grusch today, with his claims about evidence being described to him by others, Lear always admitted that he had not seen any of this stuff himself. Yet despite having no real first-hand knowledge or evidence, he continued to make more and more unbelievable and specific claims about the EBEs he said Majestic 12 had captured. That they took sustenance through their skin instead of ingesting food in a more traditional manner.
Their digestive system is atrophied. They can't eat through their mouth anymore. You know how they eat? Well, these cattle mutilations, they take the hormones and the enzymes from those cattle and they spread it on their skin, and their skin absorbs the nutrients and then excretes the waste back through their skin.
And that they moved by thought, which I guess means some kind of teleportation?
The EBEs are kept in an electromagnetic facility called a YY-2. The reason they had to create an electromagnetic facility is the fact that the EBEs are so advanced, they're at least 500 million years advanced from us, and probably more. They can move by thought.
Move by thought.
And they can also disappear.
It makes you wonder why they would need craft to pilot at all. And the logic of many claims he made is far more faulty than this. Take his assertion to George Knapp that we had recovered 10 to 15 craft.
The government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers.
And 30 to 50 alien bodies.
They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies.
In the very next interview with Knapp, he says there are 70 species of aliens visiting Earth.
George, there's at least 70 different species, and probably more.
Those numbers simply don't add up. how do we know about the 20 other species if we have recovered 50 only? Were the rest living EBEs? And does this mean each spacecraft was manned by a multicultural crew representing around 7 different species aboard each vehicle? How very like a Starfleet vessel it would have to be. And since he said they came from 5 different civilizations, these must have been melting pot civilizations indeed. Despite these outrageous claims, he would go on to appear on far more television programs than even Donald Keyhoe, including a lot of terrible History Channel trash like Brad Meltzer's Decoded, America's Book of Secrets, and Ancient Aliens. During his time in the spotlight, John Lear would make numerous predictions that would never come true. In talking about the UFO abduction phenomenon, he claimed without clear evidence that abductees were being programmed like the boys from Brazil to go somewhere specific within the next 5 years and do something momentous.
They put a post-hypnotic suggestion. According to many of the people that have been hypnotized and we found out what they've told them, apparently within the next 2 to 5 years there is going to be a big event. Something enormous is going to happen. And these people who have been abducted, and there's probably over 100,000 of them, have been given some place to go and something to do.
Which, of course, none ever seem to have done.
So how do we know that that's true?
Because they said they're going to do something. They know that they're going to do something, but under the hypnosis, they can't find out exactly what it is.
Near the end of his life, he has been described, even by sympathetic and credulous researchers like George Knapp, as becoming even more lunatic in his claims, telling whoever would listen that there were more than 90 alien races that lived on the sun. While at the time of his first appearance, Lear seemed like a credible figure blowing the whistle on incredible things, in the end, he would be revealed as an absolute crackpot. Today, some may try to assert that David Grusch's claims about alien wreckage and pilot retrieval show John Lear was right. But Lear was only ever repeating those claims, just as Grusch is today. And we can't forget about all the other completely daft claims he made, which will surely never be convincingly corroborated. Lear certainly liked to say that he would eventually be proven right.
And although it sounds strange, believe me when I tell you, you may not find out in a month, a year, 5 years, or 10 years, but you'll look back at what I'm telling you now, and you'll say to yourself, my gosh, the son of a gun was right.
But the fact is, he's already been proven wrong so many times that he'll never be vindicated. Looking back at similar claims made by others in the last 100 years of American history should provide some sense that Grusch's claims must also be viewed skeptically. Very similar claims of a government cover-up of UAP can be clearly traced back to Donald Keyhoe. And as we've seen, his evidence and arguments were shaky and unconvincing. Now these same claims appear repackaged and made more palatable as a claim that certain agencies tasked with the analysis of UAP have not been transparent with Congress. Certainly the 2017 New York Times piece on the black money funding of the Pentagon's former UAP program demonstrated that. That should not be news. This latest congressional hearing on UFOs, the first of its kind since 1966, was not focused on establishing that. Instead, it was a platform on which claims about UFOs and cover-up could be trotted back out and paraded before the American public. Similar accusations of covert crash retrievals and alien body recovery go all the way back to the Roswell legend and the MJ-12 hoax, both attributable to Bill Moore, who has been discredited as a disinformation agent, all of it popularized by John Lear, who ended up being far less trustworthy than he may have at first appeared in his Las Vegas news interview. And like Keyhoe and Lear, Grusch also just seems to be repeating things he has read or that others have told him. Yes, Grusch does appear to be a more legitimate whistleblower, in that he followed the protocols to achieve lawful whistleblower status. And the context of his statements may seem to lend him further credibility, since he is speaking under oath in a public congressional hearing, rather than in a radio or television interview in which the stakes are far lower. And it may appear that everything Grusch says must be true because his statements have been cleared by his employer. However, we must remember that if nothing Grusch says turns out to be accurate, this wouldn't be the first time that someone testified to something that wasn't true. And remember that he is only saying what he says others told him, so it would not even necessarily be considered perjury, unless it could be proven that he was never told such things, which would be especially hard to prove, given that he does not even testify as to who told him the things he's saying he's heard. And last, but perhaps most importantly, we must remember that his statements being cleared only means he's not saying anything classified, not that anything he's saying is true. Indeed, the fact that his claims about alien craft and body retrieval have been cleared seems to indicate that they are not true. Because if they were, wouldn't they be classified and therefore not cleared for a public hearing? So we may ask, why is this being taken so seriously? How did this whistleblower's unsupported statements about alien conspiracies get packaged as a major congressional hearing and thus draw so much press coverage? If up on our conspiracy board we were to stretch out that red string from the pin pushed into Grusch's photo, we may trace a direct line back to John Lear through other media figures that Lear would go on to introduce to the public, and to members of the press who brought their messages to the world. Namely, George Knapp, that Las Vegas talking head, who first put Lear on the air, who has since made a career out of promoting other UFO whistleblowers, and now has some connection to David Grusch, which I will explore further in Part 2 of UFO Whistleblowers, an American Tradition. Thanks for listening to Historical Blindness. Check out the blog post for this episode, which should go up on historicalblindness.com sometime before the next episode, for a transcript, related imagery, and citations for further reading. As always, thanks go out to my partner patrons: Diane Lane, Joe Escott, Devlin Hoff, Michael Markham, Mitchell Shuttler, Jessica Reeves, Fred from Colorado, Robin Naggett, Rebecca, Don Mundus, Eunice Allen Bradley, Juliet O'Connor, Jonathan Williams, Joshua Luddington, Logan Houlihan, Lily Powers, Lonnie Coffer, Ralph Fenn, Emma, Lee Holland, Kevin Osborne, Ed Shockley, Benny Slater, and Rachel Hornbrook. I imagine you, my biggest supporters, are, like me, drawn to this weird stuff, but perhaps a bit more reticent to credit it than maybe you were in your youth. Thanks for turning your attention to more skeptical takes like mine, which unfortunately are just not as popular among those who seek out podcasts on these topics. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows, like The Constant and The Conspirators, who just recently has been talking about the myth of an alien base under Dulce, New Mexico. Some music on this episode was licensed through a Blue Dot Sessions blanket license at the time of the episode's publication. Additional music is by Kai Engel, licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution license. Check out the show notes for a list of the tracks used. You can support the show by pledging on Patreon or by making a one-time donation on PayPal. Find those links in the show notes or find me on Venmo at Historical Blindness. Until next time, remember, as you've long been told, you can't trust what you hear on television. Well, unfortunately, it seems that extends to C-SPAN as well. Just because it's said under oath before congressional representatives doesn't mean it's not misleading or untrue, especially these days when numerous congresspeople themselves promote baseless conspiracy narratives.
This episode is brought to you by Bluehost. You might not be a tech genius, but you want the website for your business to crush it. Thankfully, Bluehost makes it easy. Customized, optimized, and monetized. Everything exactly how you want with AI. Your site can be up within minutes, and the search engine tools even help you get more site visitors. Whatever your passion project is, set it up with Bluehost. With their 30-day money-back guarantee, what have you got to lose? Head to Bluehost.com to start now.
The Civil War and Reconstruction was a pivotal era in American history.
When a war was fought to save the Union and to free the slaves.
And when the work to rebuild the nation after that war was over turned into a struggle to guarantee liberty and justice for all Americans.
I'm Tracy.
And I'm Rich.
And we want to invite you to join us as we take an in-depth look at this pivotal era in American history.
Look for the Civil War and Reconstruction wherever you find your podcasts.